Groundhog Day is a movie about life, everyday routines, and monotony. The question posed by Phil Connors resonates deeply with each of us.
What would you do if you were stuck in one place and every day was exactly the same and nothing that you did mattered?
We've all experienced that feeling of being stuck in a moment of life where everything seems to repeat over and over again. We wake up, hate the alarm clock, take the same route to work, talk to the same people, follow the same schedule, come home exhausted and worn out, and do the same things we did yesterday, the same things we'll do tomorrow. Then we fall asleep and the cycle repeats. You can see repetition as a fantastical concept or even a kind of curse, but you can also view it as a metaphor for the routine that shapes our lives. When we first see Phil, he's standing in front of a blue screen, delivering the weather forecast. This subtly hints that his life feels artificial. He experiences almost no real emotions. He's merely existing, focused only on himself and whatever might make his life a little better. Nothing and no one else matters to him. In this context, it's fitting that he shares the same name as the groundhog, an animal everyone cares about and loves. Similarly, people around Phil Connors constantly try to reach out and help him. But Phil is too self-absorbed to notice others or even think about them. Even on the very first day before the repetition begins, Phil acts as if everything is already repeating over and over again, and he's already bored of it.
Then it's the same old shtick every year. The guy comes out with a big stick and raps on the door. They pull the little rat out, they talk to him, the rat talks back, and then they tell us what's going to happen.
He knows how the ceremony works and doesn't believe there's any real purpose or meaning to it. So when the day resets, and every following day turns out to be just like the last, we have to ask ourselves, is this really any different from how Phil had been living his life up until that point? Each day feels the same. He wakes up, goes to work, does his duty, and then rushes home. Nothing significant happens in his life. Groundhog Day is a critique of everyday life and routine. Why do we do what we do if it all seems meaningless and our actions have no logical conclusion? Is there a way out of this endless cycle? The short answer is yes. Through Phil Connors' example, it's easy to trace all the stages of accepting routine and the journey one must take to break free from the cycle of everyday life. This is a film about what brings change to life, what can make us break free from the dull routine that doesn't change day after day. Doing what energizes us helps us feel better, not just ourselves, but also those around us. According to the film, this thing is love for others in the broadest sense. One day, Phil took a step towards it and woke up as a different person, someone who could appreciate things he had never valued before, things he hadn't even thought about. This is a film about the nature of change, and Phil is the perfect protagonist in this context because he seems completely incapable of changing. He's selfish, a real jerk. What he has is never enough, even though many would dream of being in his shoes. Phil sees himself as more important than he really is.
For your information, hairdo, there is a major network interested in me.
He refuses to stay in a cheap hotel with his colleagues. He sees himself as a global celebrity, and an interview with the groundhog is beneath him, the ultimate form of humiliation. Rita summarizes that his main trait is narcissism, his ego. It seems like he's not even joking when he calls himself a god.
I'm sorry? What was that again?
I'm a god.
You're a god.
I'm a god. I'm not the god. I don't think.
And this isn't just a conclusion Phil comes to after discovering he's immortal. He was convinced of it from the very beginning.
Don't you listen to the weather? We got a major storm here.
I make the weather. All of this moisture coming up out.
And that's his main problem. The truth is he's far, far less important than he thinks. Phil the groundhog, who has no impact on anything, doesn't matter at all. He's like the groundhog meteorologist, predicting the weather with varying success. Notice how Rita describes the ritual with the groundhog, who is forced out of his burrow. He comes out, looks around, scrunches his nose, then either sees his shadow or doesn't. And this perfectly mirrors Phil's situation. According to the ritual, winter will continue if the groundhog sees his shadow. The same rules apply to Phil. For him, winter will end only if he gets rid of his shadow. In other words, the loop will disappear only if he lets go of his ego.
Look out for your shadow there, pal.
And one day, Phil was pretty close to the answer.
There is no way that this winter is ever going to end as long as this groundhog keeps seeing his shadow.
But change is a tough process. especially for Phil, because he is a reflection of each of us, our laziness and our reluctance to change anything. Circumstances trap him in a place where nothing changes, not metaphorically, but literally. Moreover, he's stuck in a small provincial town where nothing ever happens, and pulling the groundhog out of his hole is the big event. In such towns, life moves slowly, the embodiment of boredom and routine. Circumstances make Phil immortal because in words he'd rather die than change, which is quite fitting for him. For such self-centered guys, one lifetime might not be enough to change, and Phil is forced to go through all the stages of accepting the grey reality, the same stages we face when trying to break free from our own routines. At first, we try to figure out what's wrong and where we went off track. Then we decide that the best way to escape the routine is to live it up to the fullest. But Phil clearly shows that sooner or later, fun turns into just another routine. After that, we try to fight it, and if we don't find an answer, we fall into depression. Some people drink themselves into oblivion, while others are consumed by much darker thoughts. Phil's life is one big cycle with no beginning or end. He just wants it all to end. Countless attempts to break the cycle end in failure. Then he begins to realize that there's more to life than focusing on himself. He's lived through thousands of days, but nothing changed, because he kept doing the same things in different forms, but overall, nothing was different. It was always the same day, just like the first one. Phil had decades to come to this realization. He was frozen in one moment of his life, not aging. We, however, don't have those extra decades. As the film shows, if we had infinite time, at first it would bore us, and eventually it would lead to depression. If you direct all your resources toward yourself, satisfying your selfish desires, you won't find happiness. For Phil, this meant that tomorrow would never come, that nothing would ever change. One day he spends a great day with Rita.
It's a perfect day. You couldn't have planned a day like this.
Well, you can. It just takes an awful lot of work.
He was close to the answer. Every day can be good if you try, but Phil was only pleasing Rita for selfish reasons. It's only when he opens up to her, trying to share warmth instead of taking it, that he begins to understand what he truly needs. Rita stays in his room. The next morning, Phil wakes up alone. Outside, it's still the same day, Groundhog Day. But this time, the song on the radio no longer annoys him, because the lyrics have taken on real meaning for Phil. Phil truly falls in love with Rita. He stops trying to control everything, stops taking. He begins to give, meeting people with a smile and warmth, reading books, playing music, and making ice sculptures. At first, he lives as if tomorrow will never come, but by the end of the film, he does the complete opposite. He lives as if tomorrow will come, even though he's sure it won't. Every day, he catches a boy falling from a tree, saves Lester from choking, changes a tire for a sweet old woman, and even insures his life, knowing he can't hurt himself. It may seem meaningless, but for Phil it matters. Everyone around him is living the same day, and he's trying to make it better for everyone. This is where Phil's cycle of days is broken. The last day Phil experiences in Punxsutawney is the day he lives for others, fully giving himself up, letting go of his selfish I. Phil's winter ends when he stops seeing his own shadow. By the end of the film, he breaks free not so much from the Groundhog Day loop, but from everyday life and routine, because the only barrier that kept him from living the day differently was in his mind. You will keep living the same day as long as you keep doing the same things. Phil's routine was there before the loop, it was in the loop, and it will be there after the loop. Even with an endless amount of resources, it's not always possible to change your surroundings. But what we can truly change is our attitude toward the world around us. All change starts from within. The goal of change is love for others. It is this love that will help overcome the gray everyday life and live happily.